Welcome back to Elevate Your Game Business and Mindset Talks. Today is a very special day. It's the 5th episode and we get to welcome James Price. James, thank you very much for coming on today. I look forward to having a great chat with you today.
Chris, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure to be along.
So James, you've got 20 years experience in valuations, advisory and working across multiple different industries. Tell us a little bit about that and how you got started, mate.
Well, I sort of grew into it, I guess. I had an employed kind of career that stretched across a range of industries, from banking and finance to agribusiness to marketing to government, and a few bits and bobs in other industries, including the meat industry, thrown in there. So that was in my sort of from 20s to I guess, late 30s. And one of the themes in that career was I always worked with businesses, and I found myself being involved in analysing problems and helping to solve problems. And so JPA Business was formed back in 2002. And so we're sort of 22, 23 years old, and we're about solving problems for businesses. And so that theme's kind of carried through with my experience. And having the opportunity to work across a range of businesses kind of helps with that, because, it means that you've got a capability to look at things differently.
To understand each individual business when you're working with them.
Well, that's right. I mean, we don't take on a client, for instance, in the construction industry or, the real estate industry or the hospitality industry, and propose to them that we know everything about their business or their industry. But we know enough about what makes a business tick to look under the bonnet, do the agnostics, and identify the levers that make a difference if you pull them the right way. Mm-hmm. And that's essentially what we're about. Our business is, there's three parts of it. We're a valuation business, so we value companies. As I say, we like to value the things you can't see. Yep. So, and goodwill is one of those. How
do you value goodwill?
Well, it's tricky, right? Because, we used to look at, back 5 years ago when we were valuing companies, we'd spend a lot of time looking at the financial accounts and looking at, the earnings of a business to determine what the sustainability of those earnings are moving forward. Because in essence, that's the value of a company. It's not the earnings they got last year. Say they made $1 million in profit last year. That's fine, but will that $1 million be repeated this year, next year, and the year after? And what's the probability that that's going to be repeated? Mm-hmm. That's the essence of value of a business, and it's the essence of goodwill. Mm-hmm. But financials are just one play. There's a whole range of business health factors that go to the sustainability of those earnings. And they are things like the strength of your team, your culture, the mix of roles and how they play into the key things that are done in the business. Your client portfolio, how strong is that portfolio? How diverse is it? Can it weather external factors that might impact the industry, the business over time? The strength of your supplier base. Have you got tie-ups with certain suppliers? Will they be with you through the thick and the thin? Have you got a competitive arrangement where you can manage margin with your suppliers, or, are you beholden to one or two? So there's a bunch of different health factors that couple with that financial performance to develop a view about future maintainable earnings. And at the end of the day, goodwill is the surplus value when you add up the value of plant and equipment, the value of working capital, and the value of the business. Now, if there's any left, that's goodwill.
Yep.
But if there's not, in other words, if you go to the balance sheet, say the business is worth $3 million, you go to the balance sheet and there's $2.5 million of plant and equipment on the balance sheet, and 500,000 of working capital, debtors minus creditors, that's 3 million. The value of the business is 3 million. There's no goodwill, right? But if there's a surplus there, then technically there's goodwill because the earnings are being, driven over and above the value of assets.
And is it difficult to create goodwill in a business?
Oh, well, it is because it's a sustainable thing, and typically you can't always control when clients want to buy off you. And so that creates a whole bunch of volatility, in your sales and in your earnings. So it's structuring a client base so you've got predictable earnings, predictable sales, and then it's structuring the way you deliver that with your team and your suppliers and your methods and your processes, manufacturing in your case, to some degree, to make sure that you can deliver it and deliver it profitably, right? So there's a lot of levers there, right? You can have great sales and they can be doubling year on year on year, but you may not have any goodwill because those sales aren't flowing to your earnings line. And there's plenty of companies that have tricky times when they see a lot of growth and they chase growth, but they don't necessarily see those earnings flow to the bottom line. So you've got to manage a whole bunch of levers to make sure that the sustainable earnings are there, but they're not just there for today; they're there for the future.
Yeah. So if somebody engaged your services, what would that typically look like, James? How do we, if you're going to come and evaluate my business, how does that process work?
Well, say you're wanting a value on your business because you're not wanting to sell. You're wanting to improve the performance of the business.
Yep.
We would typically be engaged for a couple of months, and we come in and provide what's called a market appraisal on the business, which in summary is a detailed report that provides a whole bunch of assessment on why we think the business is worth what it is.
Yep.
So effectively, from day one, we issue you an information request list, and that list has got the sort of things I just spoke about. So it's got all the financial performance on the business going backwards for a period, perhaps 5 years. Then it's got a whole bunch of financial questions about, well, what do the forward earnings look like? And typically, when I mentioned health factors before, one of the key health factors of a business is the pipeline.
Yep.
Right? It's not what you did yesterday. It's what you're going to do today, tomorrow, next month, next 6 months, next 12 months. Now, sometimes in businesses that can be contracted, but even if it's not, the greater visibility you have on the pipeline, the more we'll get to feel how sustainable your earnings are going forward.
Yeah.
Right? So we will pick into those things. We'll look at the strength of your team, their capabilities, their training, the mix of skills, how much concentration risk there is around you as a director versus other key people on the top bench, perhaps in the team, because concentration risk, to an external investor in your business, can mean serious risk. If you were to run over by a bus tomorrow, what happens to the business?
Yep.
Are the earnings sustainable?
Yep.
So, in essence, when we get engaged, we're like a buyer. We're in the buyer's shoes,
Yes.
in the market,
Yep.
looking at your business.
Yes.
And we're saying, would we take the risk, and how much would we pay for the return that we look like we can get?
Yes.
So, we're looking at that pipeline, we're looking at the people, we're looking at the client portfolio. It might be that you have revenue for the last year, 30% coming from one client, and then a whole bunch of clients beyond that. We look at that 30% client. And just like a share portfolio, and we say, gee, would you want 30% of your investment in, let's say, BHP, for instance? Yep. How's the mining industry going? How's the cycle going? Is it up? Is it down? Yep. What are the claims on that business? Are they likely to be a strong client? If they were to fall over, what would happen to this business? Are there other clients that would take their place? Or would the business really struggle for a period to pick up? Right?
What it's lost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So client portfolio is critical because it's where your money comes from.
Yeah.
Like they're the ones paying the bills. They've got the purchasing behaviour that's driving your delivery mechanisms, but also it's driving your cash flow. So client is important. We look at the suppliers, as I talked about before, to look at the strength of that supplier network. And then we look at your brand and we look at your networks and your standing in the community just to understand how thick you are.
Yes.
Are you a easy come, easy go? Or is there a strength around where you get your business?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So all those things plus the external market you're operating in. So it might be in the construction sector that we see some real upticks in the next 1, 2, 3 years if interest rates are to come back, for instance.
Yes.
Right? So we'd be factoring that into the prospects of the business in looking at that pipeline and looking at forecasts. And then the last thing we look at is what have like and similar businesses sold for in this market most recently?
Yes.
And they are private businesses mostly. In our case, we tend to focus on the private market. Small, mid-size, large private businesses. And we do our research, and no business is exactly the same, but we say, okay, well, you're in glass and windows and doors. Let's look at other businesses like that have sold in the last 12, 24 months.
Yes.
And what multiple of earnings have they sold for? And then we might look at other businesses that are not glass, but they are building materials related, right? They're exposed to the same market. And we look at what they've sold for. And we develop a pool of what's called comparables. And then we come to a view about what investors and buyers have paid for similar and like businesses.
Yeah.
And that's usually a multiple of earnings. Now, there are other methods of valuation, but, for today's discussion, this is one we use typically.
Mm-hmm.
So in essence, it's a maths game from then. It's the multiple of earnings times the future maintainable earnings of the business. And the future maintainable earnings, as I said, it's sort of a technical representation of earnings in the business for the next 12 months.
Yeah.
Right? So it's saying, righto, this business we're talking about here, the last 3 years, it had a profit of 150,000 3 years ago. It did 750 the year before last, and it did $1.5 million this year.
Yeah.
It's got a forward pipeline that's looking really strong. It's going into a market that is a bit difficult, but it's potentially improving.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we take a view about, well, what do we think the earnings are for the next 12 months if the business was run exactly as it's run today, with the people that's running it today, with the same resources and capital investment. And we take a view that we think the earnings are going to be 1.25 million, for instance. And then we simply times it by the market multiple. Now, with those pool of comparables, we might have come up with a 4 multiple. So it's 1.25 times 4, right? Which is 5 mil.
Yeah.
And that's what we call enterprise value. And I talked before about there's 3 things that make up value. That's enterprise value. The value of plant and equipment used in the business.
Yes.
The working capital, debtors, creditors, other key payments.
Yes.
Associated stock, inventory. And then if there's a surplus, it's goodwill.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There are the 3 things that make up enterprise value. Of course, if your business is owned by a company, then you own the share in the company. Now, that's not share value, that's enterprise value. So to get to share value, you simply add cash and cash equivalents that are on the balance sheet and subtract debt,
Yes.
right? And that's your equity value, right? Which, divided by the number of shares gives you a share value, right? So there's a bit of complexity there.
Certainly.
But look, at the end of the day, a valuer's role, it's an art and a science, right?
Yep.
There's an element of gut feel, but there's also a fair bit of an analysis. And as I say, we sit ourselves in the shoes of a purchaser. What would this purchaser be prepared to invest to get the sort of return that this business has been delivering and is likely to deliver in a sustainable way in the near future?
I think that's a great way to look at what you guys do, how you really pull things apart, but you sit there in the shoes of somebody that's actually going to look like buying the business. So you're giving the best advice possible, aren't you?
Well, I think we can, we pride ourselves, part of our culture is we're independent.
Yep.
And we take that very seriously, to an extent that, sometimes we're telling our client what they probably don't want to hear, but we feel we need to reflect the market to them in the best way possible. And it's interesting, more and more people are coming to us and saying, well, we don't want to sell. We just want to think about whether we can drive the business harder, and we want to know how we're comparing with other players in our market. And maybe in 5 to 10 years, we might take on an investor or we might want to exit, but we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So they're using valuation as a business enhancement tool. And I guess what we do is identify the levers they can pull to enhance the value as a result of our work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how crucial is it for a business owner to understand the value of their business?
I think it's critical. I think from day one, in setting up a business, you should be thinking about what is the value, what are the value drivers of the business, and what am I creating, and how could I exit this business if I needed to? Because let me tell you, nothing is forever.
No.
Like we've had clients, 2 partners that have been extremely successful. It was a chippy business, right, in Melbourne. Basically, a joinery business, commercial fit out, big blue chip clients. They ran the business for 25 years, very successful. They bought a lot of real estate as a result. They had solid earnings. The business had its ups and downs. They were 50-50 partners, and one, suddenly got the death wish, cancer and not coming back, right? So, you would think, like, we're in this forever, guys, and eventually we'll sell or close down. But things can happen that you don't know about, and from day one. And it's hard because the last thing you want to think about when you're going into business those early years is, how do I set it up for sale? Like, it's a bit weird. It sort of doesn't make sense.
Yeah, because you're passionate and you want to drive something, right?
Yeah, and you're sort of saying, that'll never happen.
Yeah.
And and I'm with a partner and it'll always work, and but the reality is there's always curveballs.
Life happens.
Life does happen, but you can't go wrong in thinking about the value from day one, because if you never sell it, the value is dropping into your pocket.
That's right.
Right? And I do like to talk to our clients and say, listen, don't always focus on the pot of gold at the end being the sale when you want to retire. Think about value from day one, because part of having a business is seeing that value delivered to you for the risk you're taking every year.
Yeah.
Right? And if you look at that in a holistic way, you're going to be a lot better business owner. Right? Because sometimes you're going to say, well, there's value there, but I want to reinvest it in the business to grow the business, so I'm not going to take it out as dividends, right? But you're making that decision consciously because you know that you're delivering a particular amount of value. As a business owner, if you don't know what your business is worth and the return you're getting, then I think you're missing something.
Yeah.
And, you'd be wise to get someone to help you understand that. Because it'll unlock a whole different way in terms of how you run the business.
Yeah, I think it's very important to understand that value and understand what actually helps drive those levers like you're saying.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, you kind of you don't have a plan, right? Because nobody really gives you a mud map in business, do they?
Well, they don't, and it's concerning. And like even the best advisors, purport and business coaches and the like, purport to have all the tools for a business owner to run their biz, right? But I don't know. I've knocked around a bit, and you can only do so much, to be honest. Our business is not based on sort of methods and process that is standard across everything. We tend to be able to accept that our clients are pretty damn smart at what they do, but sometimes they come up with problems and they need to phone a friend and get some confidence around how I solve this problem. And normally, what I like to see in terms of what we bring to the table in solving a problem is we bring analysis, independence, and facts about what the problem is and what it's doing to the business and other factors that are impacting it. The last thing I want to bring is an emotional view. Oh, you should do this because, traditionally that's not the right approach. Like, to me, that's not adding value, right? So it's having a fact base and providing a client with a fact base and added confidence for them to make a business decision based on that business support. And I think those things sort of help unlock value. And remember, it's not always financial. Value is not necessary. I mean, when people say value, they think of dollars, right?
Yep.
Well, ultimately, I guess that's kind of the outcome. But the levers you're going to pull to drive value are not necessarily financial levers, Like for instance, we were talking at the top of the hour when we came in about owner risk, directors in a business.
Yep.
And I was saying that, some of the juiciest, best performing businesses have huge owner risk from my experience. And sometimes they take that on their shoulders because they want that control. And that's the prerogative of the owner. But equally, sometimes those owners don't actually fully understand their value in the business versus other tasks and roles in the business. And to be able to provide a succession path for others in their team to take on some of that decision-making potentially unlocks their value, the owner's value, to work on higher and mightier things.
Yes.
Right? And that's it's a hard concept to get right from my experience in a small and mid-sized business, but once it's unlocked, it can deliver super value and sustainable returns.
Yeah, look, I can relate to that because I'm obviously going through that at the moment myself in my business, and we were talking before, and it is challenging to let go and to give some trust to other people.
Yes,
and not do all the decisions yourself, but you also have to mitigate that in a correct way, don't you?
Well, you do, and look, there's no right or wrong. It's hard. It's one of the hardest things in my view in business.
Yep.
And I think there's two forces, if I look at it, that are operating separately but collide, which an owner has got to think about. One is the lament when you put so many hours in developing someone in your team, potentially to an important role, and you don't get what you would have liked to develop. And there's sort of this pressure and force to say, well, gee, I've tried. Should I persist, or is it all too hard? Let me tell you, you should persist, but that's an important issue. And there's plenty of owners that shake their head and say, well, I'm not going there again because I've tried and tried.
It's too hard.
It's too hard. The other force is with the owner, themselves. And it's this issue about trust. Do I give it? How much do I give? And am I okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
And what will the result be? And will it create a fire that might burn the business down? Or am I prepared to wait and be patient and let that flow through and deal with the consequences, right? And that's equally hard because it means that the business owner's got to take themselves to task, really, and say, well, hold on, what am I really good at versus what might other people in my team be better than me at?
Mm-hmm.
And am I prepared to have someone come up with a solution which mightn't be the way I'd do it, but will deliver the goods regardless, noting, though, that there's an element of risk that they might get it wrong. Now, I might have got it wrong if I made the decision, but it's easier, right, because I'm taking the risk, right? But when someone else is going to burn down my business, wow,
It gets a bit scary, doesn't it?
Well, it does because you're sitting there and you've got no clothes on and the sea's gone out, so to speak.
And you've got no control.
Exactly. So you've got to be, to do that really well, you've got to be very confident in your own ability and what you're really, really good at in the case of the business, but you've also got to be super critical of yourself and say, I'm actually not that good at that. And I'm not that good at that. But I know how to hire someone that's very good at that. And I'm prepared to create a culture that rewards their ability to deliver that to the business, right? So those dynamics, I think that's the hardest thing in business. But those two forces, don't give up. As a business owner, I would say don't give up on either of them.
Mm-hmm.
You'll find it hard. One is very confronting because it's putting you and the mirror straight there.
Yes.
The other is like, will I ever get there? Persistence is the name of the game. And yes, if you've got the dynamics right and they're connected right, because, you're the person managing that succession, right? So have you got yourself right? And then, are you selecting the right people? Are you creating the right culture for them to succeed in your business, knowing that some of their solutions will be slightly different to what you might have had in mind?
Yeah. Patience is very big, isn't it? You need to have patience.
It's critical. I don't know. Are you a patient dude?
Look, I'm not. Over the last couple of years, I've been trying to master that. I've been getting better and better. What about yourself?
Oh, look, I'm terribly impatient. I have been all my life, somewhat to my detriment in some respects, but, like I jump around like a grasshopper.
Yeah.
I've done that. I've moved on,
Yeah.
Why haven't we done that?
Yeah.
Where are we on this? Probably the last 5 years I've developed a level of patience. It's still an internal challenge with me, but I think knowing it's challenging when you're sitting there saying, will I follow that up or will I just see where it gets to? And you're not thinking so much about the person you're following up, you're thinking about yourself. And you're thinking, oh, you little shit. Give the guy a chance, right? But so I think it's not easy, right?
No.
It's just like the giving trust issue.
Yes.
10 years ago in my business, I would have never given trust to my team. I loved it to death, but I would take on the solution. I would wear the risk, and the trust was with it was with me. I had trouble handing that over. A different issue today.
Yeah.
I still get tingles in the back of my neck sometimes about an issue, but if you work on it, you can improve it.
Yeah, most definitely. Look, I watched a video just talking before about when you said you got to find things in a business that you might not be the best at, right? And then hire the people that are the best at doing that. I watched a video with Harry Triggerboff.
Oh, yes.
Westfields.
Yeah.
Very smart guy.
Yeah, amazing.
He pretty much said that he found the people that were the best in the positions that he needed them to be in, and he spent time and work with them.
Yes.
And then let them do their job.
Yeah.
So they're smarter than him at that particular role. How do you think that that mindset. Do you think that that's a good idea? I mean,
look, I subscribe to that idea.
Yep.
And as my business has gone on, I've moved to that environment. I've got some really young, in their 20s, analysts working in my business. And look, if you look at them as on the smartness scope in terms of analysing business problems and doing it in an objective manner, but also presenting those problems to the client effectively, I'd probably put myself as a 5, and some of these dudes are 8 and 9.
Yeah.
Now, they don't have more than 2, 3, 4, 5 years experience in business, but they're so smart.
So switched on.
I had the pleasure of doing a referee call for a previous business analyst of mine, and he's now in his early 30s, and he's in a very senior finance role in a quite a large listed business in Australia. He was with me 5 years ago, I guess, and we're talking to the recruiter because he's potentially looking for other opportunities, and they said, what was he like? And I said he was challenging. He was very challenging because, but not from an emotional perspective. I said, we'd be tearing apart a client's problem and looking at the solutions, and I'd just about have solved it, I thought, with his help. And then he'd say, but hold on, that doesn't make sense. For these reasons, why are we going that way, right? So he would, strong critical thinker, fact-based decision maker, but also quite canny in terms of looking at sort of the commercial factors, had a lot of commercial acumen for a young dude, right? So as a result, I knew on the clients we worked on together, we got a super result.
Yeah.
Right? We got better than average result.
Yeah.
Like, because in business, continuous improvement is easy to say, but it's a must to do. And it means that every circumstance is not as good the next day.
Yes.
Right? So you've got to have levers to do that. And if you've got people around you that are better than you in the disciplines that you're not so good at, you're just setting it up for success. Now, the key that you need to work on as a business owner, you as in the business owners at large, is setting an environment and a culture around that team so that they understand the broader expectations of your brand and what you want to deliver to your customers and how they should be playing as a team, right? And then let them loose.
Yep.
As long as they understand those and practice those things.
Yes.
Look, sparks will fly, and it'll be a bit challenging for you to manage in some respects, but the solutions will be supreme.
It's better to have more than one mind thinking about a problem, isn't it?
Oh, so good. And it's not about how many years in the saddle, the chair, so to speak.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, no experience, but it's, it's identifying people with the right attitude, special brains, a quirkiness to look at things a different way.
Fresh set of eyes.
Correct.
Yeah.
And someone that's prepared to communicate, and someone that's prepared to put their ego in their pocket, because ultimately egos get in the road of good solutions.
Of course.
Yeah?
Yep. Certainly.
Yeah. So there's a lot in that. Harry's smart.
Yeah.
And he hasn't been so successful just because.
Yeah. We spoke also about your team, building your team, right? So how do you go about building a good, effective team? Because we know the culture starts from the top, right? And then it flows down to your employees. But when you employ somebody to do a job, people sometimes are scared that, okay, if you're going to spend time training this person, they might get a job somewhere else. So how do you combat that, James?
It's
out of your experience?
Well, it's tricky, and it's tricky in small business particularly, because sometimes you haven't got the roles and the paths to necessarily keep someone in place for a strong period of time. In our business, we take on business analysts in a lot of roles, but I accept that, somewhere between 3 and 5 years, they'll move on to other roles, with clients of ours or in different industries, because we've got a fairly flat structure.
Yep.
But interestingly, I mean, we're just recruiting someone at the moment, right? And so we've had our interviews, and they've been fairly informal, to be frank. It's, well, the sort of questions I would ask in an interview is, where do you want to go with your career? And, what's important to you, and what are you good at? And what sort of culture do you like working in? And, what are the things that you would rely on others to help you with? To try and understand deeper motivations about attitude and behaviours and sort of interest. The next step, we like to put people in a live environment. So, for instance, just this week we've got one of the candidates for our team in 3 days of a live environment. So we're paying for the guy to come in. He's not employed yet. 3 days and work on a particular assignment. It's a due diligence assignment for a client that's looking to buy an engineering business in South Australia. And my team, 2 of my team, and this candidate are working together, right? Now, you would think that I would have set the scope and the details around the candidate. Well, actually, I've spoken to my team and said, now, this is going to happen. You've got an extra resource, guys. Can you set the scope for the rest of the week? And can you meet with the candidate and see what he's like?
Yep.
And develop up the work plan for the week. In other words, I'm leaving the responsibility for assessing the team to the team, right? Assessing that new candidate to the team. And so they've got an accountability to, one, brief the dude and bring them into the team and say, well, you're part of our team. We got to get this done. And, this is what you need to do, right? So, and immediately their tentacles are going out and they're seeing how he responds to that.
Yeah.
Right? Then he'll have various tasks that he'll have to deliver, and they'll assess that and they'll interact as they go along. So both parties, the candidate coming in and the team in place, get to know how each other will be experienced if they went live and the guy was recruited.
Yes.
And I think that's really important, right? Why can't we, try that before we buy that, right? But in a, it's in a commercial environment.
Yep.
But there's nothing better than, someone coming into a team, they'd be dying wondering, I wonder what it'd be really like. We'll give them a chance to figure out what it'll be like.
It's like test driving a car before you buy it, right?
Oh, exactly. But it's a meaningful thing.
Of course.
Right? And they just understand how that flow is going to be. Yep. And I find that process weeds out a lot of bad fits, so to speak.
Yep.
But the only other thing I'd say in terms of putting a good team together is, and it's something over recent times that I've employed in my team, is that everyone's on the same level in terms of being positive but also being critical about the performance of the team.
They care.
They care, but they can speak up and say, well, listen, I'm not sure you're the best to do that. Why don't I take that on and you focus on this? Because I'm better at you at that, right? Now, we have fun with that.
How do those conversations go?
Well, no, they I love them.
Good.
But they are hard. They are hard to get initially because it's quite confronting.
Of course,
right? But if you, as a manager in a team, talk as a team rather than this one-on-one business, like you need to have the one-on-one heart discussions, at particular times. That's important because we're all individuals.
Yes,
and we all need to be looked at as individuals. but also as a team to be able to say, well, listen, you're not much good at presentations, but you're very good at financial analysis. And look at this presentation. I couldn't feed that to my dog. do you know? But
I know what you're saying.
And
it's the truth, right?
But all the teams contributing.
Yes.
But they're prepared. That's why I say before, make sure you employ people that have got strong attitudes, want to learn, want to improve, and have their egos in their pocket.
That's right.
Not out on their sleeve. And then that environment will actually be really positive. And it's talking positively about performance as a team.
Yep.
But it's also talking, critically to say, how could we have done that better?
Yeah.
And you don't have to have a research project to review what you did, but you just need to get together over a little chat and say, well, what are the 3 things that we might have done better, on reflection?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're getting the team to talk,
yes,
and as a manager you're listening, that's gold in my book.
Of course.
Because they're taking on the accountability.
Yep.
Right? They're suddenly saying, well, actually, it's our team, and, just like Penrith, we're going to win the 4th grand final.
Yep.
And we're going to do it.
Yep.
Don't know what anyone else thinks, but that's what we're going to do.
Yep.
And
that's very important, because then you want people to work for you that don't just turn up for a paycheck, right? You don't want people to just be ticking the boxes and 5 o'clock on Friday come, yes, the weekend's here and we're gone, right? Because then you don't have a strong business.
It's a beautiful attribute when a team member texts you and says, listen, James, I'm concerned about this. It worried me over the weekend because I know we did that work on that report and I think we missed something.
Yep.
And I think, oh my God, how good is that? Like, it's a little thing, but the dude, had the presence of mind and care to say, how can I make sure that the business succeeds by delivering a good product? And to me, they're the simple things that if you've got those things happening in your team, even if they're happening just a little bit, promote them, develop them, because they're the things that will give you an A-class team.
And you can't put a price on that, can you?
And absolutely not. Like, even an erstwhile valuer like myself struggles, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we see that sort of culture
yes,
in a business, and we look for it now very closely when we're valuing a business, they're the real gems of businesses, because I talk about sustainability. That's the essence of sustainability, right? It's having the systems, processes, and the behaviours of the people in the business to drive the forward performance. Yeah.
It's really good, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I get excited about it. I mean, I get excited about a lot of business-orientated things. That's the trouble with me. But we see it in all different industries. So, going back to what we were talking about before about those forces and how hard it is, it's hard, and it wouldn't be valuable if it wasn't hard, right? Because in business, the really successful businesses are the ones that take complexity and hardness and simplify it and fix it.
Yeah.
But I think the sole message is it's hard, but it is achievable.
Yes.
Right? And if you're a business owner and you want to have a crack, just have patience and persistence to your words and you'll get there.
So we talked about ego for employees. I want to talk about ego for business owners and entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
We spoke about, having the right team and the right people working for us and having those egos put in the pockets.
Yes.
How important is it for a business owner or a director to have their ego put in their pocket as well?
Oh, look, it's very important. It's very important because it is, it's the root of a number of business difficulties and business failures. And I can draw on just one example as an example. A construction-orientated business back many years ago, a client of ours, single owner, young guy, and very, very decent guy. I knew the industry quite well. The family had been in the business for some time. He was leading the business. But he let his ego run wild and did deals with everyone that might be interested in doing something to do with the business,
Yep.
whether it fitted the strategy of the business and the strengths of the business or not. And it was like, oh, look, my turnover's 50. Now it's 70. Next year it'll be 110, right? Don't worry, the earnings sort of went, $1 million, negative $5 million, and worse the next year. But ego drove those decisions, from a business development perspective, just to, win the day, but there wasn't much measure in the way the dude went about things.
Yep.
It was driven on how he felt.
Yes.
Right?
Emotions.
And emotions, and, a sale's a sale, and gee, once you get in the millions, and the tens.
I'm top dog.
Yeah, no, I can sit there and I can talk,
Yeah.
I can say, well, I've got a $100 million company. Well, not really. That's sales.
Yeah.
Right?
It's
the company
minus 500.
Well, that's right. That's right. But that's where, and that business, fortunately, is still around today, but only just.
Yeah.
Right. But the other side effect that's really difficult in that environment, apart from the financial impact, is the team. The people in the business, because they're being dragged,
of course,
between pillar and post.
Yep.
Right? And there's no evenness.
Yes.
About, okay, we're sailing between Sydney and Hobart. Yes, there'll be some rough seas. We know that because we've seen the weather report. But, we're going to chart the course, and things are reasonably predictable.
Mm-hmm.
Now in business, predictability is important, but also spontaneity and innovation is important.
Of course.
So, and some of that spontaneity and innovation does come from ego.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, yeah.
But if you're marshalling a crew of numerous people to help you deliver to your value proposition so that clients are getting consistency and quality, you need a predictable, stable environment. As a business owner, if you've got a heavy play in the business as a director and you're letting your ego, muck with decisions day to day, you're impacting that stability.
Yep.
Right? And it's not good for business.
No.
Right? So you need, I think it's, know yourself. Know how your ego plays to your decisions. And, if you're the sort of dude, as I was many years ago, where an opportunity was an opportunity too good to be not an opportunity to be taken.
Yep.
That would take me all over the world. And some of those were wonderful, but there was probably 30% of them that, on reflection, what were you thinking? But not being able to critically appraise your decision-making process, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think as a business owner, there's probably two antidotes to that. One is develop a skill where you have an out-of-body experience. You take yourself out of your body and look down on yourself and say, it's interesting what you're doing today. You're very irrational in what you're doing, and you seem to be wanting to be pleased by the number of deals you do with certain people.
Mm-hmm.
What are you really thinking about?
Mm-hmm.
Where's that going to take your business?
Yes.
Now, that takes a lot to put yourself up there and say, hey, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah.
Smarten up, lad.
Yeah.
Think about the strategy you're really focusing on. Think about the longer term rather than the short term hit.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's one antidote. The other is to identify a mentor or a player in your business that you're prepared to put trust in, because you know that they will take you to task. And whilst you mightn't like it, you put yourself in a situation where they review your decisions.
Yes.
To a degree.
Yeah.
And that's, that's a big boy's way of dealing with it, but you've got to be prepared to have your ego damaged as a result.
Of course.
Right? But some of the best partnerships business partnerships where there's two players in a business or three is where one partner will take on the other. And then that partner knows that there's no one else in the business that will take him on or her on and take him to task and say, well, look, you might have wanted to buy that company, but I don't think it's going to be worthwhile for these reasons. So think again, guys. And sometimes there's fire there, right? But that's not necessarily a bad thing, providing it doesn't become too emotional. Those are the two ways you deal with ego. There's a good part of ego and a bad part. As I say, the innovation, spontaneity in a business, can be amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Elon Musk, for instance.
Yeah.
I don't know what his ego's like, but wow, he's certainly got some innovation and spontaneity.
Such an amazing mind.
Oh, incredible. Yeah. So I think that's how we need to deal with ego. We've all got it, and it displays itself in different ways. Be mindful about how your approach is being taken by other people in your team that you're asking to be part of your business.
Yep. Yeah, look, I've had a couple of things recently where I've made a decision, and at that point in time, I discuss it with my team and they're kind of like, no, don't do that. And I made the decision. But then soon after, I had to swallow my pride a little bit, and I said, okay, guys, I hear you out, so give it to me because I've got a really good team culture at CVD. Yeah. And they kind of said, well, look, you potentially should have dealt with it like this. This is a X amount of contract that you've just let go now because of you got upset.
Yeah.
So I had to swallow my pride. In the end, I ended up saving that deal, which wasn't really mine to win in the first place. One of my employees had won it. But certainly it makes a big difference to be able to stop yourself, don't act on emotion, put your ego aside and listen to your team. It's huge.
I mean, absolutely huge. And I reckon the key in that is to be able to say in front of your team, I made the wrong call.
I fucked up.
Exactly. And the moment they hear you do that, it will enlist. If you've got the right components of a culture, it'll enlist them to say, well, we're not going to let you do that again. But also they feel like they can come into the fold and help.
Yes.
Right? And so vulnerability is important in that circumstance. Sometimes as business owners, we've got to make a call.
Yeah.
And ultimately there needs to be an ultimate decision maker. And sometimes it's right to go to the team and say, listen, guys, I've heard what you said about this, this, and this, and I've got to make a decision on this. My feeling is I'm going to go this way. Now, I know that's not what you're recommending, but I'm doing it for these reasons. The team, if you've got the right culture, should respect that.
Yes.
And they should move on as a result of that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's no the right culture is one that doesn't, look, he made that decision, it was wrong.
Start talking to each other about that decision he made wrong.
Like once the decision is made, it's the team's decision.
Yeah.
If you're driving that culture right.
Yeah.
But, I think that's why you've got an effective team, right? You're prepared to listen and you're prepared to have that open discussion. As business owners, we take our roles seriously because we've got all that risk on our shoulders often. But I think in some respects, it kind of forces us to take things a bit too seriously. You've got a lot of things around you can call on if you're smart.
Yes.
Right? And you've just alluded to some of them, Chris.
Yeah. So talk about in business how people can help nurture their employees, because we spoke and just said not too long ago about training your employee and then when do you make the decision to stop training them or to start training them? I've learnt myself that sometimes the way you train people is the problem and not what you're trying to teach them, because I've obviously learnt over the years trying to train people to do a particular job. Yeah. It's been difficult and I haven't got the success out of that person because of whatever reason, and I put that down to how I've taught them. But how do you correctly train and nourish your employees to take on that important role that you want to let go as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, it's a $65 million question. I guess I've got some perspectives on that. The first one is I'd say don't treat them all the same. And that probably sounds basic, simple sort of, theory, but, I think the word training sometimes conjures up in businesses, right? Oh, we got to send them to a course and we got, everyone in, they all need this and this training and away you go.
Yep.
Sometimes that works if it's a particular safety issue or it's a particular issue that is relevant across, a class of people in your business or a group of people in your business. But you got to look at them as individuals, and they should have a professional development training plan, my view, and it doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to be sort of too documented, but a one-pager with one discussion each year to say, okay, now you're in this role and, what roles are we looking forward that you might be able to take with extra development? Okay, we've identified that role there. And what are your skills and capabilities now? What do you reckon you're really good at? And what do you reckon, you'd struggle with in terms of if I put you in that role tomorrow? And then, so you fish those out.
Yeah.
And then you say, well, okay, let's devise a few programs that can really focus in on a couple of those. And I think here less is more. I've been in plenty of businesses where they've had training programs that are something going on every month. I think you need repeatability and an emphasis and consistency, but pick a couple of key things. It might be that the individual is really good technically at what they do in terms of the trade, for instance, but the role they're going for that you want to see them move to in, say, 12 months has an element of client-facing, right? And the reality is that communication is crap.
Yep.
Right? They want to communicate, but putting them in front of the client would be like losing the client, because they'd be so honest that it'd just do them disjustice and the business disjustice,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
But technically, they couldn't have anyone better.
Yep.
They know all the aspects. So that's the thing you identify. Now, the first thing is to make sure the person actually owns the problem.
Mm-hmm.
They deal with the problem. And that's not just saying, oh, yeah, no, I'm not very good at communicating. They deeply want to change that because they see a reason to change it for themselves, right? So I think that's where a one-on-one discussion that, really, sort of gets under the bonnet of that individual around their motivations for this role. And sometimes getting another person in the team that might be in that role or in a higher role alongside that role, involved in that discussion, is not a bad thing, right? Because it gives other perspectives, right? And the individual feels like it's not really a personal attack. It's about, well, how do we make the team better? But also as an individual, how do I grow?
Yep.
Right. So I think, I'm kind of breaking down the training approach, but you can make it quite specific and simplify it down. Don't try and do too much to the individual, but make sure their motivations are lined up. And then I always think that, having a buddy system is suitable and useful where you've got the numbers in the business. You drag this dude out to the clients, you put a muzzle on him so he can't say anything. No, but you give him a feel for what others are doing.
Give him some experience.
Yeah, just kicking around, waiting in the background, hearing, one of the other team communicate to a client, take a quote with a client, look at a quality issue, look at how they respond.
Yes.
You can do that in a theoretical environment because you can have a case study in your office, right? Which, sometimes works a little bit, but there's nothing like getting out in the field
Real life.
and just seeing how it plays, because they'll see how things come up, but they'll also put themselves in the shoes, even though they won't be doing the job, and they'll be thinking, well, okay, how would I have dealt with that? And could I have dealt with that, right? And then when you come back from the field, there should be a session where you're saying to the lad, okay, you experienced the guy at St Mary's and Kellyville today at those two sites. Tell us what you experienced. To get them to verbalise and discuss the good and bad points, right? What did you think that old mate did well?
Yeah.
You know, if you were in that role, what would you have done differently? You know, so start to get them to engage so they know that they're not just a fly on the wall, right? Because they're ultimately moving to that position. The last part of the training piece is sometimes you've got to move people into a role before they might be 100% ready. And that's a judgment call, right? But it's not a bad thing, particularly if they're part of the team, so they're not coming in from outside. You know, I think as business owners, sometimes, you know, we look around and we say, oh, no one's quite right for that new role that's a bit senior and doing business development. We'll go to the market, right? And we recruit someone we don't know their culture, and we do our best to understand, but, you know, we just throw the things up in the air and see where it lands. Where if we'd looked more closely, we might have had someone that was probably perfect, but about 80%. You know, think carefully. I'm not saying it's always the case, but yeah, because sometimes you'll burn the person. You don't want to do that,
of course.
But you know, sometimes with the right support, that person could have been the best hire.
Yeah.
You know, so I think, yeah, think a bit laterally about all your resources in terms of filling a position. And manage your expectations as a manager about what you expect. And that's not to say you accept poor performance from day one because the individual's not got the capability, but think about the onboarding into the role and think about the things that show that the attitude and behaviours are matching with what your requirements are, even though the hard and fast numbers performance, if it is measured that way, may be trailing a bit, right? Because there's a period of getting used to things, right? So you need to have patience and work closely.
And support that person.
Support that person through that. Don't just throw them to the wolves and then be sitting back expecting, well, why haven't they done that? You know, you won't get much, you won't get the best out of the individual.
And it won't work.
No, it won't. It's sort of, it won't be sustainable, right? Because remember, if you're working on roles in your team, you're building sustainability in the business for many years to come. So you've got to take a long-term view, but act in the near term and be consistent. Talk about your expectations, but then support the individual to match those expectations. Yeah, but have that, you know, have that long-term view. Like people provide probably the most sustainability of your earnings. But, you know, if you're not tendering the garden carefully, the weeds will grow.
Well, it's the same as what Penrith's done, right? They've worked on their juniors for so many years, and it only took that 1 year about 4 years ago or 5 years ago that, as you see, they've lost a lot of their good players now, gone to get bigger contracts, and they still won the grand final.
Oh no, it's amazing! It's amazing, and it's a really good case study, live case study in Western Sydney about what Ivan and the team have done. Yeah, because you talk about sustainability, that's exactly what business value sustainability is all about. They've won 4 of them, and although those gem players are being seeded off into other clubs, they seem to have ones coming in through the system that are performing, you know, so strongly. Yeah. So, you know, I mean that's a great analogy when you think about business sustainability, right? Because you think about being in that business, owning that business, the value is just dripping through, right?
Well, they created the culture.
Yes.
They nourished, or they're bringing up the younger talent.
Yep.
And they've already got the culture from within the industry, so they're slotting perfectly well in. They just need a chance.
Yeah.
And by giving them a chance and support, as you can see, there's some outstanding players in this year's grand final that were coming through the ranks a couple of years ago, right?
Amazing. Yeah.
And that's the same as business.
Oh, look, I think there's a lot to learn from what goes there.
Yeah.
I really do. And it was interesting. I had a podcast with Tyrone Peachy recently, and Tyrone said, "Look, after a match, you go and sit down with Ivan, and he talks to you about how you performed." And he said, "If you had a so-so game and things were pretty ordinary, or you were feeling they were, he'd actually lift you up in the discussion.
Yep.
In terms of how he would treat you and how he would talk to you about your game and what you did. And he'd focus on the good things that you worked on. If you were cocky as hell because you thought you just creamed it, he'd actually temper that." and his reason for tempering it was to say, well, you might have done well, but you got to do it better than that.
Yeah.
Right. So I thought that was very interesting in the culture that Ivan and the squad have there. And Tyrone just said, it drove the want to improve performance in every game. And the proof is in the pudding, as you state. Like they're amazing, and such role models is that organisation and that team for all sporting teams, but also for business. Absolutely,
most certainly, yeah.
So
we've talked about nourishing, bringing up your staff, training your staff. We talked about what it's like as an entrepreneur going out, and you're putting all that hard yards in first. Now, for somebody that wants to take themselves out of the business to add more value, you've got to train your staff, put them in key roles. What advice would you give for somebody trying to scale a business?
Well, scale's a difficult thing because it means different things to different businesses and different people, to be honest. The best advice I could give for someone wanting to scale a business is look at the bottom line first.
Yeah.
Be careful.
Yeah.
As a business owner, what do you really want? Do you want to be in every household in Australia? Or do you want to make a certain amount of earnings per year? Or do you want to focus on a particular market only? Right? I think it's getting very clear with what your motivations are.
Mm-hmm.
And, if someone says to me, well, look, we've got 100 million of sales today and we want to get to 500 million. I say, well, why do you want to get to 500 million? Well, it's a nice number and it shows a sizable company, and eventually we might want to list the business, right? But there's got to be more motivation in my mind than that. Now, if someone's saying, well, at the moment, we're doing 5 million of sales, but if we can get to 20 million, our gross profit will lift from 15% to 23% because of the scale benefit of volume over, similar costs, because we'll have better buying power in our materials and blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
Right? Well, now you're talking, right? Because
it makes sense.
It sort of makes sense, right? So it's not sales for sales' sake or volume for volume's sake, but there are levers that are driving earnings through the business, efficiency through the business, that will find their way, if everything else is managed well, to the bottom line, right? Also, often in a business, and not always, but technology helps with scale. And so thinking about what investment you've got to make in that technology versus the run rate to get it fully implemented and delivering the efficiency within the business, both in terms of dollars for the units you're making, so the cost versus, the sales value of the unit, but also for the customer experience in terms of what you're delivering, right? So there's a few there's a few challenges in the scale game, right? You can have a very large volume-based business, but it may not be valuable, right? So it's picking below that sort of volume scale issue and saying, okay, have we got the right business model to drive positive earnings? And sometimes, for instance, I know of a business in electrical switches. It's a national business in Australia, and it's about a turnover of, I think, about 85 mil, owned by 3 or 4 owners. Now, they had a traditional Salesforce business model, right, where human flesh would go out and, land on your doorstep and say, you need some electrical switches, we've got them for you, and blah, 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 blah. Right? So that's what they did prior to COVID. During COVID, they redesigned their whole business model. And so what they did is they had webinars and online sales and telephone sales. And then they had teams in the latter part of COVID, when things opened up, that would be business development teams that would go out, but they had a lot bigger portfolio of clients, and they were only going to some of the best clients or the clients that were warm enough in the prospect chain. And they found that with this business model, they could sell a lot of what they were offering without going to the client at all. And yet previously, they'd been going to every one of these clients. They'd be spending money on flights and entertainment and travel and, all the face-to-face things. So now their business model, as I would call it, is a mix of channels, right? Technology-enhanced remote channel for sales, supported by online internet, but telephone-based, webinar-based. The webinar piece is about relevant information to the client about product as against from selling, right? So it's the warm-up process to help the client understand from a decision support perspective whether they need the product.
Yes.
And then there's the sales element that follows that. And then there's a separate face-to-face team in their business model. As a result, their cost for $1 of sale is reduced by 30%, right? As a result of putting that business model in, right? Now, that's based on the same level of turnover. So in a volume sense, they haven't.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? And the other thing is that model is scalable, right? Because they're not just relying on human flesh, right? I'm someone that thinks the human flesh in the sales process is important for different products and services, but it's very interesting to see what that business has done to the scale point. So I think to be good at scaling a business, you've really got to look at your underlying business model. What are the levers to ensure an efficient delivery of the service you're wanting to deliver? Both in terms of capture of client, but also then the actual delivery. And if you can get that in sync, and it has an element of automation and technology as well, then
you can scale.
Yeah, then you can scale because it's not just reliant on a human person in a chair for a period of time. Yeah, it's tricky scale. It's not easy, right? And I think, I don't want to be critical, but I think some small businesses sort of are pushed or push themselves to scale too early.
Without the right systems and processes in place.
Yeah. And I think doing that, you can really you can get some pains, right? Because you're driving up sales, and sometimes it's impacting cash flow, and you haven't got the ability to deliver. So your working capital cycle's affected, and you can get a lot of tightness in financial performance as a result.
Yeah.
So you almost need to be bursting at the seams, but have your investment in technology and automation and systems and processes in place and well tested, so that then you can ramp it up.
Get a proper health check on your business before you do that.
I think so, and don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to be a bit of a researcher. You know, sometimes in business, I think it's about trying something as a pilot, having a crack, seeing how it'll develop, and then sort of sitting back and saying, oh, yeah, that's interesting. I did this, did that. I need to fix that if that's going to work. You know, if I'm going to make that work, that's not going to work. Don't be afraid to do a bit of incremental work.
Yeah.
You know what the end outcome you're doing, but just be patient. Do a few baby steps, test it, trial it, you know, and you'll know the right clients to work that with. Usually there's an opportunity. And people in your team can kind of like that, right? Because it often means change.
Yep.
And sometimes as humans, we're not good at change.
I don't like change.
No. But getting them involved in a trial, they're part of the trial.
Yep.
Right. And so that's also a way of bringing your team along and seeing how they respond to, to the new environment.
So we talked about scale. Now I want to talk about getting a business ready for sale.
Oh.
Tell me, James, what's your advice if I wanted to get it? Not that I am, but say I wanted to get a business, not my business. I'm certainly not going to be selling my business. If you want to get a business ready for sale,
yes,
and exit, what's your advice?
Don't come to me and say you want to sell it in 3 months, because I'll tell you to go away. Yeah. Look, there's no right or wrong, and sale comes in different sort of ways, sometimes with pressure because of an event that might have happened. Other times it's just, thinking of retiring. My advice would be don't do it too late. Ideally, if you think you want to retire and you're 60 and you're looking out and you're saying traditionally, I've always wanted to be in retirement at 65, if that's where you're at, right?
Yep.
Then talk to someone at 60 and say, what does my business look like? And if you were a buyer valuing my business and looking at it as a prospect, what would you really pay for it and why? Mm-hmm. And what are the things that are attracting to value, and what are the things that are depreciating value, in your eyes, right? So it doesn't have to be 5 years, but look, ideally, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ahead of time, right? Often when we look under a bonnet of a business in those circumstances, and it's not just at a retirement, by the way, I'll refer to a business, one of the first businesses we sold, which was on the Central Coast. It was an underground cabling business owned by a young guy who was supremely successful. He was a Sparky, and he built the business to a 15 mil turnover with a 3 mil earnings, right? And he built that in 7 years, right? And he was in his early 30s at that point, and he had awesome respect. The business was going well, but it was a heavy burden on his shoulders. And he'd taken the risk and he'd delivered a solid business, but he wanted to go into property investment, right? So again, there's a non-retirement situation, but a similar sort of fork in the road.
Needed had a life change, wanted to change direction.
Yeah.
And that happened.
And wanted to get the most out of his business in terms of value so he could go into the next stage.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So as I said, make sure you get the business valued up front and get it valued by someone that gives you an independent view about what a willing buyer would pay for that business. Not an asking price, not a negotiation price, what a willing buyer would likely pay for that business and why.
Not a salesman.
No, definitely not a salesman. That's why we facilitate sales of businesses, but we don't allow our clients to engage us to sell a business unless they've separately engaged us prior to value the business, because we don't want to be conflicted.
Yeah.
Right? You don't want to just get a valuation of what you want to hear. Right? The higher the price, the better. I'm sure it is.
Of course.
But it's not going to help you.
No.
Right? So get it valued, but also sit down with your accountant and talk about tax issues. If I was to get $5 million for my business, and they bought the shares in the company, or they bought the assets out of the company, what would be the impact on tax? In other words, what would be the net impact to me, right? And think about those different ways of selling the business, right? Depending on what structure you have, the business. So there's some business in partnerships, some business in companies, and with individuals owning the shares, and then there's businesses where companies are trustees for trusts, with beneficiaries. All have different tax impacts, right? So, $5 million sounds wonderful, but what do I end up with in my pocket?
I only end up with a couple of $100,000. It's only a couple of years' wages. Is it really worth it?
Well, that's the issue, right? And so independent valuation advice, good solid tax advice, and then thinking about the valuation, what are the things that I could do to enhance the value of the business prior to sale? And often, and they're different for every business, but often they're things like a very poor information on pipeline and forward business. Very big private businesses we've dealt with don't have much visibility on that. It's amazing, right? It's critical. Absolutely. I can't speak more highly of it. It doesn't matter what business it is, except perhaps, a retail hospitality business. Every other business, you need to have some specifics on what the forward outlook looks like, what your pipeline looks like. It's absolutely critical. They don't have to be all contracts. They just it has to be visible. What's there? People. How dependent is the business on you? And can that be changed in a meaningful way over time without detrimentally impacting the business if it's highly dependent on you? Or if you've got a good valuer and advisor, they might say to you, well, look, Chris, the business will sell and we reckon it'll sell for this, but it's likely the market will say to you, 40% of those earnings I'm going to put aside and structure an earn-out on performance. And I want you to stay in the business for 3 years to get that earn-out. And I want you to commit to training up a successor over that period. And you'll be thinking, well, I've got no control. I'm stuck in the business. Do I want to do that? 40% at risk. Why do I sell? I'm better just to keep the business for 3 years and get the earnings myself. Right. So there's those trade-offs. Right.
Big decision.
But better to have that decision ahead of time as you're preparing for sale versus, you've just received an offer and that's the offer. What do I do?
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you know that that's potentially coming as a result of your preparation, well, you can start to think about the different dynamics of how to handle that. Right? Also, in some businesses, inventory is an issue. We all manage inventory differently. Some people manage it very efficiently. Other people manage it very not efficiently. And inventory is often considered as gold.
Yes.
But sometimes a purchaser won't consider it as gold. They'll consider it as trash. And the risk is you've only got one chance of selling inventory when you sell a business. So if you've got time to prepare, sometimes that leaves you the opportunity to weasel out old, obsolete items and get some value for them so that you're presenting the market at the time of sale with something that's fresh and you're going to get the sale return from that. I've had many instances where owners have lost on inventory significantly as a result of
poor housekeeping
and just not having the time to think about, well, okay, how do I address that now? So there's a lot of aspects in a sale process. When you are in the sale process, the very best sale process is one where the information prepared ahead of time, the confidential information on the business, is full, frank, transparent, and strong, right? And that doesn't mean that everything is rosy about the business.
Of course.
But
it's in order.
It's in order, and we know about communication between a buyer and seller. The minute a buyer loses confidence because the figures change so much, or the numbers are a bit screwy, or they don't kind of line up, they're thinking, well, hold on, is what they're telling me right or wrong?
What are they hiding?
What are they hiding? What's going on here? So that information flow and the preparation of that ahead of time, if you're doing it yourself or you're getting an advisor to do it with you, that's really critical, right? Is getting all those facts. And it's not dissimilar to evaluation in a sense, because what we like to do with what we call an information memorandum is present the business as if it's the guts of the information for a banker or a valuer or an accountant to review. So it's the financials, it's the forward financial position, it's the pipeline, but it's also all those other business health factors. What's that client portfolio look like? What do those suppliers look like? Are there any contracts involved for critical issues? What's the people capability look like? And what's the forward market from an external perspective look like, right? All those things are important. So, make sure, very sensitive information, a lot of that information, but if you're serious about selling under confidentiality and under clients that are properly qualified as interested, as a business owner, you're best to be able to share that information in the right way, but obviously in a sensitive way.
Be prepared.
Be prepared if you want strong value, right? And a smooth process. But there's always, it's a journey.
Yeah, of course.
But there's ways of doing it better, and there's ways to secure the best value for you, to allow you to go to the next part of your journey.
Well, look, James, I really have enjoyed this podcast. I hope everybody that's listened or is going to listen can take a lot from that. I certainly have as a business owner myself. It's been very insightful to share your knowledge. I really appreciate it, mate.
Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure. I admire you and what you're doing at CBD Glass, and it's exciting to see what you're up to. And I think your initiative with Elevate is first class. It's great to share a bit of practice and a few journeys and stories, and hopefully some business owners will pick up on it.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, James. Appreciate that.